event is all about digital and all the changes that will happen and are happening in pharma right now. And I couldn't help but kind of wonder when I arrived late last night with the wind gusts and the rain and the dark clouds, if that was kind of an omen of things to happen. If you look at digitalization, it's meant a lot of turmoil for a lot of different industries. I've worked in quite a few of them myself. All the content industries, music, film, books, have been transformed quite rapidly and within very few years. And even sectors and industries that don't necessarily obviously lead themselves towards digital have seen rapid transformation. And I couldn't help but think of the film industry, so actually, or photography, developing films. Because that used to be all about chemistry. If you were to win in that industry, you needed to know chemistry, from making the raw film that you produce the negative from to developing the films. But then the very old mathematical theory about pixelating pictures all of a sudden became digitalized. And then within very few years, filmmaking was all about digitalizing and all about computational power and distribution over the internet. And we all know the story about Kodak. And maybe there's some kind of reference to Pharma in there? I don't know. Well, anyway, today the clouds seem to have disappeared, the sun is out, and maybe all is good and great. So the two panelists I have here, let me just quickly introduce you before I ask you my opening question. We've got with us Davidek Herron. He's head of outbound digital channels in Europe and international markets at Teva. And then we have Shwen Gwee from Novartis. He's the general manager and head of open innovation. Seeing how the clouds have all of a sudden disappeared, why all this fuss? I mean, margins are good in pharma. You know, the patients are increasingly aware of what's going on and what treatments are out there. Why is digitalization such an issue? And please have a seat with me. Who wants to kick off on that? Why is this even a problem?
So I'll start off first. So first and foremost, thank you for the introduction. My name is Davidek Herron. I am with Teva Pharmaceuticals. Just as a pretense, these are my thoughts and my thoughts only, not my company.
I'll ditto that.
We'll say more.
We'll hear that a lot, I think.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot to say about that, right? So right now, if you really look at the full P&Ls and what's going on, it's the margins are still somewhat there in pharma, and I think our vendors do a good job on selling us on the next shiny tool. But as you can see, if you look at the next 2 to 3 to 5 year LRPs for a lot of pharma companies, it's almost like a magic trick, right? S&M and both direct and indirect are staying flat. Yes, sales and gross margin have to increase, right? So the question is, how are businesses trying to navigate or fill that gap? But that's kind of, we can go into more detail about that later.
Yeah, I think to the point that you raised earlier about Kodak, the way that you're presenting it now in terms of what's wrong with what we're doing now is a bit like when Kodak said what's wrong with traditional photography. They were actually the first creators of a digital camera. But their answer to sustaining their business was, let's pump more money into the way we've always done it so that we can sell more chemicals, because that's what we know. In a world where chemical-based photography was shrinking, where the internet was coming up and digital was getting more ubiquitous, and instead they pumped their money into the wrong thing instead of looking to the future and investing in R&D to develop that further. In the same way, we are in a market now where we have shrinking sales forces, we get less access to HCPs, healthcare professionals, and we are also still trying to do drug discovery at a cost that's crazy, right? It's immense. It's at $1 billion. It's 10 years before we bring a drug to market. While it's fine the way we're doing it now, it's high cost, and then equivalently we're getting, in a sense, high margin. But can we actually make it much more efficient and make it much more, basically making it much more easy to access for everybody? Because if you can lower the cost and lower the speed, the more you can bring drugs to market and make it accessible to all.
So I'd like to tap into that, because I couldn't help think, what's digital's role in this? You're mentioning problems, but why will making stuff into zeros and ones solve that.
Have you ever tried looking at the cost of sending an email versus a printed booklet by mail? That's one example, right? Right there. The other one is, the other one is what Dario was saying about AI and ML. That's going to empower us to be able to do things a lot quicker. Things that traditionally were done by humans that took time, that took a lot of work and a lot of time can really be sped up. It's not going to replace humans, but it's really going to enhance our ability to do things quicker, better, smarter, and more personalized.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to digital, right? So it's funny enough, I was speaking with my son, he's only 5 years old, over the weekend. He's like, Daddy, what do you do at work? I'm like, well, I lead outbound digital for Teva. He's like, what does that mean? I'm like, what does that mean, right? Really, it's around business transformation. I think in pharma, we're always tailored as potentially that industry or a vertical that somewhat moves a little ladder on the ladder end. And as you can see, like the fintech and other industries, they've kind of already embraced that whole digitalization of their business, whether it's e-commerce and self-service sites, or how do you potentially funnel more of your customers over. If you look at, I think, Adidas just blew out their Q1 numbers because they're moving more of their users to the online ordering platform and the e-commerce. So there's a lot of use cases outside of the industry of how you can use digital to better optimize your business, right? So you're really controlling those direct and indirect S&M spends. And that's, again, just purely on the commercial side. We're not talking right now, TGO on the manufacturing, R&D, there's so much ways, or finance, that digital really can better optimize your business, let's say.
Please feel free to ask questions. I think it'll be a lot more fun than if it's your question as well, rather than just mine. That's me being humble. Happens rarely for men over 40. Anyway, I'd like to dig deeper into how digitalizing, and particularly something like machine learning and AI, and the more advanced stuff, can help pharma. And I think I'd like to leave out what happens in research and development, because there I think we see a lot of these things being applied. For the first couple of years, mostly as buzzwords for PR purposes, but then increasingly actually being taken in to do some of the heavy lifting. How is that process happening on the commercial side?
Sure. I think you already talked a little bit about that, but I think on the commercial side too, what's happening now is you're getting through AI and ML and other digital sort of technology platforms. Certainly, what's happening now is you're getting to a stage where you're much more personalized in the approach to engaging with your customers, whether they're healthcare professionals, patients, or caregivers. And certainly, that is one area where previously we always used to do one size fits all, and then we used to go to segmentation. And now, as you start adapting your technology platforms to actually learn and understand user behavior in real time, you're able to then personalize messages, content, support, and all the other parts of the user journey to really engage everybody in a more personalized way.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Let me give you a more real life example, kind of how AI machine learning, if I read another LinkedIn article about it or hear another thing at a Congress of let's do AI machine learning, what does that mean in our business? I'll give you one specific use case that we're doing in a specific country where we're using what's called like a recommendation engine, where literally we're having our sales force, and this is strictly a B2B, right, on the generic side, where when they go in front of pharmacies and hospitals, we're recommending the best product basket to position to this customer, right? That's beneficial for them, but also beneficial for us as well. And the first customer, obviously, in this use case is our sales reps, right? We need to get them to use the tool. But we do have stats now that show that 30% of our sales force does use it, and when they use it, 80% of the time they close for a sale, which is almost twofold when they don't use it. So we do see the benefits of like AI, machine learning, best recommendations, right? But now we need to start, as an industry, start sharing these use cases. Because again, at these conferences, we always speak hypothetical, like, hey, this is kind of what we're doing, but not getting down into the nitty gritty. I think the more we can share collectively, because even though some of us have competing products, but we're competing against the world here, we're not competing against each other. The better we can share these learnings and really get tangible outcomes that actually at the end of the day benefit the patient.
Yeah, and so if I could add on to that, I think I know which platform you're talking about. I think that's one area already where that recommendation engine is helping pharma sales reps and others to engage with the right message at the right time with the right person. I think on top of that, you've also got data in general. That's never been another technology like digital where you have so much information and data that you can collect, analyze, and really react to, and optimize the way that you do things. In the past, I think collecting things in spreadsheets and separate siloed databases and in different ways, it was really difficult to analyze those in a way that makes it meaningful for you to make change in your industry. But now in the time of digital, that data is gold in terms of helping you optimize the way you do things so you can become more efficient.
So that makes me think of two questions. One is probably the elephant in the room, which is regulation. But before we jump into that, I want to also mention the second one, just so we don't get into a rabbit hole on the first one, which is people and competencies. So the first one, regulation. Yes, sure, other industries use this technology to have really rapid iterations. How does that work in a pharma space? I remember sitting actually with you, I think, Davidek, in a panel, webinar panel, where all the participants were asked how often they iterate their marketing material. And I think less than 30% had more than 2 iterations per year. So the same marketing material was used all through the year by 70% of the companies. How's AI going to help you in that sense, in that space? So regulation, how, and this was down to regulation because it took too long to get approval of content that no one bothered at the end. How do we overcome that limitation and obstruction?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what you said, the people, right? And by regulations, the people in compliance, medical, other teams, so just understanding what you're trying to do. But I think there's certain spots, so let's say within phase 1 or phase 2 or sprint 1 and 2, where AI is probably more beneficial. Kind of one of my things I'll talk about tomorrow is really how we want to use kind of AI to really guide best next actions for our marketeers. And I think that's one vertical we really don't focus as much on. So ideally, there really shouldn't be digital teams, it should be marketing teams. This skill set should lie within our marketing teams, but that's a whole other conversation.
It's funny how we still talk about digital. Most other industries just take for granted. Like, we should talk about electricity.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah. No, so I think it comes down to the marketeers, really, what are they trying to solve for, right? So typically in the past, we're used to doing what we're comfortable doing, right? Whereas people, change management is a big key. So I think to answer your question, it always starts with the people first, and understanding where you're driving to, and really getting some quick wins to show the validity behind the program.
Yeah, I think it's not just pharma that's struggling with regulation right now. The whole world is struggling with regulation. You look at what's happening with Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, all those cases. Those are nothing to do with pharma, but they apply to everybody, right? And apply to all channels that we think of as digital channels. So I think it's a time where legislators and people that are making these regulations need to come up to speed on how these channels work. And the effect that they can have and the strong influence that they can have. I mean, we've seen nations overturned because of social media. We've seen data being used to change the way we do elections. It's a powerful medium, and regulators, if you looked at the questioning of Mark Zuckerberg by the regulators in the US, you could tell very well that the regulators actually don't understand how Facebook works. So I think regulators too are not excused from understanding how technologies work if they want to regulate those technologies.
That's super interesting point that other industries are also facing regulation. It's one of the points where whenever GAFA has been mentioned as a potential enemy, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, what Pharma has said is, well, they don't have the compliance setup that we do. They don't know regulation, but indeed they do. So you mentioned when we had, both of you actually, when we had a conversation over the phone to prepare for this, how development on the commercial side is increasingly outsourced to vendors. Coming back to the question on people, do we have the competencies in pharma, do we have the culture in pharma to bring the advances of AI and data science and those enormous technological quantum leaps into pharma? Or will it be something that just the vendors will benefit from?
I think, to the point you raised earlier, Davidek, is, we tend to have these digital centers of excellence and then the marketing teams. And those two need to come together. Again, in the same way that the regulators shouldn't be excused from understanding technology platforms, marketers should understand those and how they apply and how strategy works within them as well. And right now, we're in an industry that's heavily dependent on vendors, and there's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that your internal teams need to have the knowledge to understand what those vendors are doing, how it applies, how it works, what strategy means, and then how to optimize your campaigns and so on. So to that extent, I think we need to change the way that we think of what marketers do, the type of marketers we hire, the type of strengths that we have inside in order to adapt to this new world. Having said that, I think there are a lot of companies that are now moving to a world where they're bringing in data scientists, but they are also being done in that world where there's center of excellence, and so it becomes this funneling effect of, we're marketers, we're not data scientists, so we go to the data scientists. I think to an extent, data science is a very specialized area which, not every marketer can probably be a data scientist as well, but there needs to be an understanding of how to leverage them best and how to work with them completely in an integrated fashion in order for us to really understand and build up a internal workforce that knows how to apply these technologies.
Well, something like data science excuse me, will also be increasingly commoditized. So it's going to be more and more plug and play, and even artificial intelligence and machine learning will be something you just have as a software tool, and you can click the button with this funny icon that says something magic will happen, and it will happen, right? Just as we've come accustomed to with Excel and with building websites and whatnot. So that's going to help it along. But you still need the culture, you still need the understanding of agility. How are we in that sense as an industry?
Well, even go back to your first question, right? I think it comes down to the people, but if you really think about AI, machine learning, all this stuff, and it sounds good in theory, but when you actually start doing it, you understand how messed up the back-end piece is. And that's something we could spend a whole Congress on talking about our background infrastructures in our companies, right? We have over 1,000 different systems, multiple websites, how do you get all these things talking, interoperability? I mean, we have to figure that out, right? And that's something that we found out the hard way, which I'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow, the realities behind that. But to answer your question, I mean, it really comes down to understanding where we're trying to go. What is our, what are we trying to accomplish? And from a marketer, it really comes down to 4 key things. I tell it to everyone, OGSN, what are your objectives, what are your goals? Strategically, how are you going to do that? And that's where AI and all this stuff comes in. And then how do you measure that? So it's not complicated, it's really getting back to the fundamentals and understanding what drives your business. For each one of your countries in the room, there's different drivers for your business, you understand what that is. And I think that's when you can start sprinkling in these little wins when it comes to different ways of approaching that. Yeah.
There's a question. Hi there, at the front. Do we have a mic?
Yeah, maybe my voice is terrible.
Or I can repeat your
You can
question.
repeat the question,
I can
yeah.
repeat your question.
So basically, do you see a model where you have pharma company becoming tech company or digital health company, and tech company becoming pharma company? Does it work?
Yeah, so do you see a model where pharma companies will become tech companies or vice versa? Is that sort of a representation? Yeah.
I think I see both, and I've been predicting for years that it's only a matter of time before a big tech platform company is going to acquire a small biotech or basically do it themselves and become a pharma company. To an extent, Google has 2 life sciences companies, Verily and Calico, right? So essentially, they're already in that space. And then at the same time, you'll see companies like ours, which are moving towards that digital health world, and then that depends on your definition of what digital health is. Certainly within Novartis, we have a digital therapeutics partnership with Pear Therapeutics and a few others, and we have embraced that as part of the future of where we're going. So certainly, if you want to consider digital therapeutics as a digital tech company platform, then certainly we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, and I see in the next couple of years not much changing, but I do see key players like the Novartis of the world who are really good at R&D, like the Tevas of the world who are really good at manufacturing, trying to understand what part of that value chain are they going to position themselves for. There will always be a need for our companies, but I think the consolidation will happen. And I think as our drugs become more and more commoditized, to be very clear, the margins continue to become lower, it's going to be hard for us to justify the amount of spend that we put into this. So I think it's really going to come down to the numbers, to be very clear. And I think in a lot of these background meetings, leaders are trying to figure out how do we potentially squeeze more out of the business, right? And that's just reality.
And so we see return on investment on R&D in pharma dropping linearly since the 60s, and it's going to cross 0 next year, apparently. It's going to be fun. Celebrate that next pharma next year, how ours crossing 0. So I'm a strong believer that what we need to do as an industry to make up for that, to mitigate that, is to work a lot more with the products post-authorization. So to make sure that something like a simplest dosage is actually personalized to the individual. So we get the drugs to work on a bigger portion of the patient population. Otherwise, we're never going to fix that. And that requires a lot of the digital skills that we see in the tech companies, where they've got 1,000 or tens of thousands of experiments with different user experiences going on at the same time, managing all that feedback data from the patients, which is something I don't see pharma being ready for yet.
I think to that point, I think marketing is changing as well in terms of this digital empowerment. It's going from just an engagement medium to a service design, right? You're actually servicing the user journey and helping them become more efficient with leveraging whether it's a traditional drug or a digital therapeutic. You want them to be able to use it as efficiently and as personalized as possible to adapt to their needs.
Yeah, and that's probably where pharma is definitely a newcomer, and we're up against some players that have evolved because they master that discipline. So I think that's probably all we'll be able to have time for now. But I hope that the last point here is something that will keep everyone's attention for this screen for the next 2 days, because there's definitely something to investigate further, how we'll swallow that tough pill and digitalize pharma. Okay, thank you very much to the panelists.